Section 16 of a Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa, by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields. Chapter 1. To be broke to the world was by no means a new experience to Dick Sidney, and as he sat on the sandy shore near Luderitz-Bucht and watched the setting sun turn the broad ocean into molten gold, he was little troubled by the fact that his last mark had been spent an hour or two back for a very belated and necessary breakfast, and that he was now absolutely penniless. Always an optimist, Dick easily outdid the immortal Micawber in his faith in something turning up just when things looked their blackest, and he had literally no thought for the morrow until his hand, mechanically groping in his pocket for the wherewithal to fill his pipe, advised him of the fact that even his baccy was finished. This was serious, for Dick's old battered briar rarely left his mouth, and whilst the odoriferous Boer equivalent for the divine weed held out, food and drink were but minor considerations. But something must be done now, so knocking out the ashes from his last whiff, and with one more futile grope in his capacious pocket, he stuck his empty pipe in his mouth, rose, stretched himself, and glancing once more at the pageant of the western sky, turned back towards the contemptible collection of tin shanties, drinking saloons, empty beer bottles, and Germans, known as Luderitz-Bucht. A few months back the discovery of diamonds had brought fame to this wind-swept wilderness, and fame had been immediately followed by the choicest collection of cosmopolitan scoundreldom that a mining rush had ever been responsible for. Now Dick Sidney, though a man of variegated experience and a bit of a hard case, was still passing honest and a gentleman, and he soon found that he stood but little chance in Luderitz-Bucht. His modest capital, which he had hoped to increase in this new diamondopolis, had vanished within a few weeks of his arrival, swallowed up by shares in diamond fields that existed only in the vivid imagination of the swindling company promoters, or so-called prospectors, who infested the place, and when his illusions of easily made wealth had vanished also, and he had tried to obtain a billet, he had failed utterly. His knockabout experiences had included several spells of gold prospecting and mining in California and other wild spots, and being as hard as nails, he was admirably suited to the life of a prospector, and prospectors were being paid large salaries in those early days of the diamond rush in German Southwest Africa. But unfortunately for himself, Dick possessed a constitutional but at times embarrassing prejudice against lying, and in his numerous applications about prospecting jobs had made no secret of the fact that his prospecting had never been for diamonds. And as a result, he had had to stand aside and see all sorts of gentry taken on for the numerous expeditions that were constantly being arranged, runaway seamen, cooks, stewards, and stokers from the ships, gangers and navvies from the railways, ne'er-do-wells of all descriptions, with but here and there an old river-digger or genuine prospector to leaven the lump. Added to his stubborn and uncompromising honesty, Dick possessed another trait which severely handicapped him in this German-governed dust-hole of creation, in that he was uncompromisingly British, and took no pains to conceal the fact, and here in Luderitz-Bucht the arrogance of the German officials, and the way in which they boasted of their army and their Kaiser and their beer and their sauerkraut, and in short of every product of their whole blamed fatherland, exasperated Dick to a degree. Though not very big, he was a bundle of muscle and sinew, and already he had been fined heavily for making a mess of one or two spread-eagled Teutons who had been unwise enough to mistake his quiet manner for timidity. Dick strolled back over the low-lying sand dunes to the little township, where lights were already twinkling in the stores and beer halls, and passing the largest of these, he suddenly realized that he was thirsty, and momentarily forgetting the state of his finance, he turned into the bar for a bottle of beer. The brightly lit room was full of people, naturally mostly Germans, who, whilst imbibing vast quantities of their national beverage, were singing, bragging, and swearing at the top of their voices, and after the manner of their kind. At the farther end of the room, a big corpulent swashbuckler was holding forth loudly to a circle of admiring cronies. His peroration was an introduction to a toast. That toast was, "To the day." Dick had heard it frequently of late. In fact, wherever Germans and beer came together, that toast was being drank at the time. The day! Dick and every other Britisher knew what day was meant, and as a rule took but little notice of these fire-eating gas-bags. Anyway, though he understood German, he spoke it but little. And so he stood quietly, imbibing his bottle of beer, whilst Bombastus Furiosus still held forth. His quiet attitude evidently misled the orator, whose guttural German became mixed with quite enough English to make his remarks perfectly understandable to the few Britishers amongst the crowd. Boasting and bragging, and with his discourse liberally garnished with donnerwetters and such like meteorological expressions dear to the Teuton, this big chap let the world at large know what would happen on the great day when the whole Schweinhund Englander nation would, at long last, be knocked sky-high into everlasting flinders by the ineffable and invincible army of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Dick got tired of the drunken man's blatant boasting, and finished his beer with the intention of leaving the bar before he lost his temper. But as he put down the empty mug, he realized with consternation that he had not the wherewithal to pay for the drink. He stood embarrassed and irresolute. What could he say to excuse himself? How explain before this crowd of contemptuous Germans? At that moment, however, something happened to put the matter out of his mind entirely. The orator had gone one better, and was now describing what various kinds of Schweinhunden all Britishers were, and those in Luderitzbucht in particular, when suddenly a small man, who had been sitting quietly in a corner of the room, left his seat, and walking up to the group, called out, "Here, you with the mouth! Shut your fat head about Englishmen, or I'll make you. I'm English. What you got to say about it?" A roar of laughter went up from the Germans, any of whom looked big enough to eat the small man. Dick pushed nearer to the group. He knew the chap now. He was a little Cockney Jew, a bookmaker, horse-dealer, and what not, scarcely the kind of chap to be expected to show pluck and patriotism. Yet these are often met with in the most unexpected places. There he stood, opposite a German big enough to eat him, and in fluent Cockney he proceeded to tell that big man more about himself than is good for any fat man to know. Of course, it could not last long. The jeering laughter changed to threats and curses, and then suddenly the Colossus made a terrific round-arm, all-embracing swipe at that small man, calculated to obliterate him once for all. But he wasn't there when it arrived, and to Dick's joy and amazement, he saw the little Jew dodge in under the stroke, and with a spring and a lightning blow on the point bring down the big bully with a crash to the floor. "A boxer, by gad!" yelled Dick, capering with excitement. "Bravo, little un!" But the small man's victory was only that of a moment. The next, the whole crowd had flung themselves upon him, and the miniature champion of rural Britannia was borne to the ground in the centre of a whirl of legs, arms, chairs, bottles, and the other weapons usually preferred by the German larrikin to bare fists. Dick could stand no more, and the members of that peace conference must have thought about that time that a cyclone had struck them. It was no time for fancy boxing. Two men who faced Dick went down like ninepins before a terrific left and right between wind and water. A big Bavarian hero, brandishing a beer bottle, collapsed with a sudden and acute attack of knee in the stomach, and a strong and handy chair coming to Dick's hand in the nick of time and used as a flail, and with strict impartiality, soon did the rest. Berserk with fright, and with the plucky little Jew to help him, Dick cleared the bar till not a soul but the frightened barkeeper and themselves stood within the locked doors. Outside they could hear the crowd yelling for the police. "Mein Gott, mein lieber Gott, who will pay for all der smashes?" whimpered the barkeeper, wringing his hands and looking round at the trail of the cyclone. "Tell the truth about that big fat Ed starting the row to the police, and I'll pay for the smash," said the little Jew. "And while we're waiting for the police, let's have a drink," he continued. "Here's your health, governor. Blimey, but you're a bit useful in a scrap." By this time the police were pounding at the door. "My money," again pleaded the barkeeper. "Right-o," said the Jew, putting his hand in his pocket. His face changed. Quickly and anxiously he searched for his pocket-book. It was gone. Whilst they had had him on the floor, they had improved the occasion, and his blank stare of dismay was mirrored on Dick's face as the latter remembered that he too was penniless and owed for a drink. "Schweinhunden, thieves, robbers, damned fools!" yelled the exasperated barkeeper, unlocking the door for the police. That night they slept in a German prison. End of section 16. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 17 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa, by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, Prospector, Chapter 2. Sidney could not disguise from himself the fact that the situation was rather serious. The escapade would probably mean a sentence of a stiff bout of imprisonment or a heavy fine, and as he was penniless, it would perforce have to be the former. "Hang that little Yiddisher," he growled as he sucked at his empty pipe. "Wish I'd let him get out of his trouble himself. No, I couldn't have done that. He's a plucky little beggar, and I suppose he's as bad off as myself now his pocket-book's gone. Still, I suppose something'll turn up." His optimism was justified, for about 10 o'clock the following morning he was liberated without more ado, and outside the jail he found the little Hebrew who had been the cause of all the trouble. "I squared him," explained the little man with a grin. "Sent a note along to a pal of mine who knows the ropes, and he's soon got us out. Better come along and have some grub." "Look here," said Dick, "I'd better let you know right away that I'm dead broke." "Never mind," said the other. "Come along and feed, and then we'll yap." A good meal and a good smoke after it, and the little Jew said abruptly, "Now then, Mr. Sidney, I've found out a bit about you this morning, and if you want a job, I think I can get one for you. We want a straight man for something that's on, and I think you'll do." "I'm game," said Dick, "if it's a straight deal." "Straight as a die," replied Solstein, or Solly, as he liked to be called. "Let's get along the beach. We can talk there." Pacing along the sands, with no one to hear them but the seagulls, and with his old briar again charged with some real God-fearing cake tobacco, Sidney heard what it was that was required of him, and there and then Solly's offer was accepted. 2 days later an expedition, outfitted regardless of expense in Johannesburg, left Luderitzburg to carry out a systematic testing of certain distant diamond fields recently discovered and acquired by a local syndicate, and reported to be fabulously rich, so rich that an extremely large company talked of acquiring them in turn, and those in the know hinted at a huge flotation. Money was therefore no object, and the party was both large and well equipped. It consisted of a diamond expert acting on behalf of the syndicate, another expert acting on behalf of the would-be purchasers, and, incidentally, to watch the other chap, a financial representative of either side, to watch proceedings. 2 prospectors, presumably to watch each other, a learned professor of geology to give an unbiased report of the fields, and lastly Dick Sidney, ostensibly in charge of the transport, but in reality to watch the whole caboodle of them. Striking northeast, the expedition almost immediately entered a practically untraversed desert of barren sand dunes, waterless, and both difficult and dangerous to traverse, and their animals drank nothing for the first 2 days. On the third, however, guided by the discovering syndicate's prospector Grossman, and by 2 stunted little bushmen in his employ, they came to a deep waterhole, where the precious fluid, though brack, alkaline, and stagnant, was still plentiful and drinkable, and within working distance of which the newly discovered fields were located. Here the dunes were interspersed with long narrow R's, covered with fine gravel and loose stones, and here and there covered with scrubby vegetation. Within a few days Sidney had to acknowledge that his first conclusion, that there was not a single honest man in the party besides himself, was an unjust one, for the harmless and most necessary professor of geology was a notable exception. Absorbed in his science, he passed most of his time in his tent, poring over a microscope, taking very little heed, apparently, of what was going on, and he was obviously without guile and likely to be easily gulled by even the most transparent roguery. And that the others were rogues, Dick grew more and more convinced, and it would have been hard to say which of the party he detested the more: Gilderman, the suave Johannesburg expert, glib, well-dressed and fastidious; Gelder, the syndicate's expert from the same locality, a rough-voiced, domineering mining engineer; Zweiter and Spatboom, the financial men; or Jones and Grossman, the 2 prospectors. On the whole, he thought, were he a free agent, he would have picked a quarrel with each and all of them for the sake of giving them individually a thrashing, and in that case the immaculate Gilderman would have been his first choice. Each and all of them spoke English and professed that nationality, but Dick soon decided that, with the possible exception of Jones, what wasn't German of the party was certainly Jew. But still, to all appearance, everything was fair and above board. The prospectors would point out the most likely spots to try for diamonds. The Ovampo boys would be set to work, and almost invariably they found diamonds. Occasionally one or other of the experts would suggest a different spot, and usually these sapient individuals would justify their reputation by finding diamonds also in these spots. The syndicate's expert was jubilant, the company's expert apparently well satisfied, and the professor beamed upon the stones as they came from the sieve, talked learnedly of their origin and the peculiarities of the deposit they were found in, and passed a great deal of time in abstruse calculations as to the probable yield of the fields, based upon the rich finds they were making, and the genuineness of which he, obviously, never doubted. Sidney picked up several small stones himself. The experts were always finding them, so were the financial agents, yet Dick, though for a time he could find out nothing to confirm his opinion, was convinced that the whole thing meant a gigantic swindle. A few words in French between the experts, which they did not expect the man in charge of the transport to understand, a word here and a look there, strengthened this conviction into certainty, but still he had no proof. Now Dick had heard of, and suffered from, more than one case of salting since he first came to Luderitzbucht, and the quantity of illicit diamonds in the hands of unscrupulous people made such salting a comparatively easy matter. But if it were being done in this case, it was certainly being done very thoroughly and artistically, and when? The whole party moved from place to place practically together. In fact, they kept in sight of each other ostentatiously. It must be done after dark, if at all, and Dick resolved to watch at night as soon as he came to that conclusion. That same night, from his tiny patrol tent, he watched the lights go out one by one, until the camp lay silent, and apparently everyone was asleep. and as time passed he was nodding himself when suddenly a shadow stole silently from the tent occupied by the two prospectors, crossed to the expert's tent, and disappeared inside. Dick saw the momentary gleam of an electric torch and heard the tinkle of a bunch of keys. Then the form reappeared, and with a glance round, passed silently and rapidly out of sight across the sand dunes. Dick followed, the pale light from a waning moon occasionally peeping from behind the clouds, making the pursuit an easy one. After half an hour of rapid walking, the man disappeared over a gigantic dune that Dick had noticed in the distance the previous evening, and which he had heard mark the position of the next field to be examined. More cautiously now, and keeping well away from the man's actual spoor, Dick crept up the slope and peered over the crest down the farther side. The moon at that moment shone out clearly, and there, not 50 yards away from him, Dick could see the figure of Grossman, the prospector. He was walking slowly up and down, now and then throwing his arm out with the action of a sower, and the seeds he sowed sparkled like dewdrops in the moonlight, for he was sowing diamonds. Salting. End of section 17. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 18 of Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa, by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 18. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, Prospector. Chapter 3, Part 1. Salting. There was no doubt about it. The prospector to whom the syndicate owning the fields had entrusted the important task of locating the most likely spots on which to demonstrate their richness, had with admirable forethought forestalled that notoriously fickle jade Fortune, and brought the diamonds along himself, before the remainder of the testing party arrived. Tomorrow the whole caboodle of unbiased individuals, representing both his own party and the enormously wealthy Joburg financiers who were negotiating for the fields with a view to a big flotation, would come along as per schedule, and would doubtless be greatly impressed by this fresh proof of the field's richness. Dick lay flat on his face on the warm and accommodating sand dune, and watched Grossman for some time. He was prodigal with the diamonds, and this was undoubtedly destined to be an exceptionally rich field. The question is, reasoned Dick, how many of these swabs are in this swindle? Let's see now. It's no good letting my angry passions run away with me, and jumping on this chap as I'd like to do. I must reason this out. The other prospector sleeps in the same tent, sometimes disagrees with this chap as to the best place to test. In that case, yes, they've always tried and found in both places, and they sleep in the same tent. They're both in it. Same with the experts, both in the same tent, and they keep the diamonds. That's what the swab went to them tonight for. And Zweter and Spatboom, well, no one could be honest with faces like theirs. Blazes, they're all in it, and all this elaborate business is just to artistically fool the old professor. He's not part of the swindle anyway. That was it, undoubtedly. The old professor who, simple as a child in many things, had yet a name famous the world over. He it was that this precious crowd of scoundrels were deceiving so elaborately. He it was whose word of the genuineness of the finds would carry weight with the financiers, and when the time became ripe, would rope in the guileless public. Well, he, Dick, would have to take a hand in it, but it would require caution. Moreover, Solly, to whom he owed his job, had told him at parting, "We don't want no experience. Just you watch all of these blighters and find out what their game is, and lie low. That's all." His diamond sowing finished, Grossman sat down, took off his veldschoens, and knocked out the sand, loaded up his pipe, and with a sigh of contentment, which the pipeless and tobacco-loving Dick heard and appreciated, turned back towards the camp. Luckily, Dick, old hand on the plains of countries where it is not considered healthy to be found on the home trail of a man one watches at night, had taken the precaution to crawl aside sufficiently to give this knave of diamonds a wide berth, and he lay inert and silent as the dead till Grossman was well on his homeward journey, before following him to a well-earned spell of sleep. Following the usual routine, the next morning the two prospectors rode ahead to locate the best spot for proving this fresh field, the rest of the expedition following more leisurely. Dick had to confess that they were most artistic in their methods. On arriving near the high dune, where he had seen Grossman giving Fortune a friendly lead in the small hours of the morning, Dick found to his astonishment that they were being guided to quite a different spot at some distance from the carefully prepared jeweller's shop. "What the devil does this mean?" mused he, as he rode behind with the Professor and the others. He could not be mistaken about the spot, for the dune was too prominent a landmark, yet there were the two prospectors signalling to them from a place at least half a mile away from the scene of his nocturnal experience. Trotting across to them, they found an argument in full swing. "Gentlemen," said the other prospector, a tall, slab-sided individual, whose English was of a pronounced American flavour, "I don't think this kind of thing is fair. I'm here earning the company's dollars, and I'm about tired of being yanked around to try spots that Grossman points out. I guess I'm here to locate the pay dirt as well as he is. That's what the company pays me for. That's what I'm here for, to find out the truth. No, sir, not any I don't." "Junes," cried Gilderman, "remember your position. I'm sure no one ever expressed a doubt as to the syndicate's fines, and I—" "But look-ye here, Mr. Gilderman," interrupted the prospector, "you've got to excuse me. I'm supposed to look into this thing myself. Besides, it's for the blamed fool's own benefit. Any fool can see that the deepest wash runs the other side of that dune, not this." "Rot!" jerked out Grossman. "Well, if you want to go to your damned old place, do so." High words followed. The experts became partisans. Everyone was dragged in except Dick and the Herr Professor, and the latter, flushed and rattled and his glasses all awry, was at length appealed to in the matter. "Ah, gentlemens," said he, beaming from one to the other, and absolutely exuding good temper and conciliation, "why quarrel on this so splendid an expedition, hein? Let us then return to the Herr Prospector June's choice. Let us accede to this so good man's request, hein?" "Right," snorted Grossman. "But if the damned place is no good, don't blame me and don't condemn the field. I can show you where there are stones anyway." And so, with many a sneer and jeer, and with an atmosphere of extreme tension pervading the whole party, Junes was allowed to lead the way to the spot of his choice. He went straight across the foot of the big dune, and in a few minutes had amply justified himself, for there were diamonds in abundance, the diamonds his confederate Grossman had strewn there the night before. Now, Solly's instructions to Dick to lie low and say nothing, no matter what he found out, had been explicit and insisted upon, and in spite of his instinct to warn the Professor, he might have been content to lie low and go on watching till the trip was over, had it not been for a certain small but excessively highly charged black scorpion that found its way into Dick's sleeping bag that night, and more than making up in cussedness what it lacked in size, gave him an exceedingly warm time of it. One sting in particular, on a big vein in his leg, gave him excruciating pain, and though he applied the universal felt remedy of nicotine from his pipe bowl, the agony was so great and the swelling so alarming that at length he hobbled off to the Professor's tent to see if that learned man could give him some relief. He found the old gentleman sleeping soundly, and had some difficulty in rousing him, but that task accomplished, so assiduous was the Professor in dressing the sting, and such kindly interest did he display in both Dick and the defunct scorpion, that Dick, who had always liked the old chap, almost made up his mind to tell him all that he had seen and suspected. The scorpion really settled the question for him, for the professor had scarcely finished injecting Dick's leg than he turned his attention to the dead reptile, at which he had already cast many curious glances, as it lay on his little camp table beside his medicine chest, and now he proceeded to examine it thoroughly, lighting a powerful acetylene lamp for the purpose, and scarcely had the strong rays fallen upon the black, wicked, lobster-like little iniquity, than the Herr Professor let off a regular yell of delight, and literally fell upon Dick's neck. "Ach, mein Lieber!" he exclaimed ecstatically. "Aber this is most wunderbar! It is of the great fortune, good luck, what you call him, that he sting you." "Good luck?" said the surprised Sidney, feeling anything but pleased. "Well, Professor, it's the kind of luck that I can very well do without. Why, the blamed little thing must have been about 1,000 volts strong. Sting! Why, it must have squirted about a pint of forked lightning into me. Luck?" "Of the greatest," said the scientist, "of the most colossal, for it is a discovery you have of him made. He is new, he is wonderful, wunderschön, wunderbar." "You're wrong, Professor," protested Dick with emphasis. "He discovered me. He may be new, newly charged, anyway." "Of a variety entirely new, Herr Sidney," insisted the old professor impressively, "and much would I have given to have been in your place to discover him." "You'd have been welcome," said Dick feelingly. "But why?" "It is my life work, my Steckenpferd, my hobby, you call it, Hein? The study of the arachnids, spiders, scorpions. Geology, you say. True, that is my work, but this other is different. This I love. Already have I 4 large volumes written upon the known varieties of scorpion, and now to have been but almost the discoverer of a new variety, it is hard to have been so near. But at least I shall be the first to describe, to classify. That honour you will grant me? It is hard to have been so near." "Believe me, Professor, it was a good deal harder to be just where I was. But I see your point, and feel for you. Indeed, I may say I'm feeling it quite a lot even now. I'm mighty sorry the electric gentleman with the red-hot trousers didn't sample you first, as you say. It's real hard he didn't, so do please take the fame and describe all you want." It took a lot of persuasion to make the scientist see it in the light that Dick did, but after a while he consented to name the new specimen after himself, and sat down to examine and gloat over his treasure. But first he showed Dick some of his books, thick tomes full of illustrations of most weird and undesirable-looking insects, spiders, scorpions, and the like, and crammed with learned descriptions bristling with Latin names, and he showed such an innocent delight in his new acquisition that Dick's mind was made up. He did not like Germans, but this old chap was so naive, so full of human kindness, so innocent and ignorant of all but his science, that it would have been infamous not to have warned him of what was happening, for Dick could see plainly enough that if nothing was said, this poor, kind-hearted old scientist would have to bear the blame when the gigantic swindle was at length discovered and the victimized public demanded a scapegoat. He lifted the fly of the tent and looked out. There was no light in any of the tents, and the sound of snoring came from them in chorus. Farther away, by the still flickering embers of the campfire, could be dimly seen a dozen or more recumbent forms, where the native boys huddled. The waning moon was just rising, and except for the snores, all was quiet, as only the desert can be. Yet Dick, when he turned once more towards the professor, stood with a warning finger on his lips, and spoke but in a whisper, for he knew that he and the man he spoke to were the only honest men in this lonely camp, and that the others would not hesitate to put either himself or the professor out of the way, if once they suspected that their villainy was known. He never doubted. Not that he was afraid, but here in the wilds, with 6 well-armed and determined men against him, he saw the need for caution. The professor he did not count, not just then. The old man still sat at his little camp table, magnifying glass in hand, and at Dick's low hist, he turned a bland, inquiring gaze in his direction. Dick came close to him, and with head half averted, so that he could listen for the slightest sound outside, he whispered his story. Not a sound came either from the camp or from his listener till his brief tale was ended. "They are all in it, all rogues together, sir," he whispered in conclusion, "and it's part of a big swindle that people will blame you for." End of section 18. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 19 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari. 7 Tales of Southwest Africa by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 19. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, prospector. Chapter 3. Part 2. And for the first time since he began his tale, he looked the professor full in the face. He started with amazement as he did so, for now he saw not a benign, smiling old scientist, beaming good nature and affability through his spectacles, but a stone-faced, iron-mouthed man, whose jaw was set with grim inflexibility, and whose eyes seemed actually to blaze with fury. The big veins stood out upon his temples, and the hand that still held the magnifying glass was now clenched in a grip of iron that trembled, not from weakness, but from the violence of his anger and emotion. Dick saw the man with new eyes. This was no worn-out old scientist, such as he had deemed him, but a man still strong and vigorous, in spite of his 70 years, a man in whom the hot blood of passion could still work wonders, and the younger man realized that if the strong hand were necessary in this affair, he would by no means need to play it alone. "Gott im Himmel," he muttered hoarsely, as Dick finished. "Diebstahl und Robberei. And through me, for I have been a fool, and I have been also to blame. Look you, Herr Sidney, now can I see but too clearly that I have neglected my work, and looked but little to the fields themselves, but to the diamonds and the gravel they brought with them. Numbskull, Dummkopf, that I have been it is. But now that I see also how they have advantage taken of this hobby of mine. Each day they have brought me spiders and scorpions and snakes to examine. Even now I have almost 100 specimens alive, and so they have thrown sand in my eyes, and would have made a criminal of me, even as they are themselves. Schändlich und verräterisch Schweinhunden. But for you, friend, they would have robbed me of my good name, and shamed me before the world. But for you, friend." As he spoke, still in a hoarse whisper, he rose and grasped Dick's hand, and strong as the latter was, he winced at the vigour of that iron grip. "And now come," said he, simply, turning as though to leave the tent. Dick caught his arm. "No, no," said he in a tense and eager whisper. "What would you do?" "Take them, bind them, disarm them, take them prisoners to Luderitzbucht to pay for their knavery," muttered the old man, savagely. "6, and with arms, you say, and what care I for 6 such Schweinhunden? And you, Herr Sidney, I know you are both strong and fearless." "Oh, nothing would suit me better than to smash up the whole outfit, but what good would it do?" urged Dick. "It's their 6 words against ours, or rather against mine so far, and most of them are German, as you know, and well in with the authorities in Luderitzbucht, and I'm English. What hope will my word have against theirs there? Besides, sir, the story as it stands will be all against yourself." "Donnerwetter, that is far. That will never do," said the old man naively. "What do you advise, then?" "Watch well, and either contrive to catch them yourself, on some of the remaining fields, or say nothing till we are safely back in Luderitzbucht, counselled Dick. Never can I so long contain myself with these thieves. Think you the company spoke of a flotation of 500,000, of £500,000, that these hounds would have caused my name in my report to rob from the public? Never can I contain myself long, but as you wish, friend, I will try, unless indeed some better plan offers. Dick crept back quietly to his little patrol tent and tried to sleep, but pain and excitement kept him wide-eyed, and he had scarcely dropped off when his Hottentot driver awakened him to tell him that 2 of the mules had broken their reins and cleared in the night, apparently making their way back in a bee-line towards Luderitzbucht. I have found their spoor, boss, he said, but they have gone far and fast, and it will need a horse to catch them. Saddle mine quickly, and I will go back myself, ordered Dick, with a muttered blessing or two on the defaulters, and within a few minutes he was cantering over the spoor of yesterday, along which the mules had bolted. He soon found where they had left the trail, and in the now clear light of dawn their spoors showed clearly in the soft sand. At last he caught sight of them, grazing on a small patch of bushman grass, growing in the hollow between 2 dunes, and after a considerable amount of trouble managed to secure them, and making them fast to a convenient bush, he climbed a big dune to have a look round and try and mark out for himself a straight cut back to camp. He recognized his whereabouts instantly, for scarcely 500 yards away rose the big dune that had been the scene of Grossman's forethought 2 nights back. The sight of it brought back Dick's indignation afresh. Beastly swabs, he thought. Why, they never even take the trouble to find out if there really are any diamonds in the blessed fields or not. From what I've seen at Coleman's Corp, this place looks extremely likely. I wonder whether, after all, they've been a bit too clever. I'll have a look anyway. Between him and the dune where the bogus find had been made, there stretched a wide, flat space of comparatively firm ground, a so-called amp, or shallow flay, in which at some time water had accumulated. Here there was very little sand, its place being taken by a deposit of fine loose grit, made up of a variety of tiny stones, all about the size of a small pea. The prevailing wind, blowing almost continually in the same direction, had heaped up this grit in little wave-like ridges, and Dick knew that if there were diamonds there, he would find them near the crest of these little waves. He went down on his hands and knees at once, and almost immediately his eye caught the glitter of a diamond. And there was another and another, and Dick, as he picked up stone after stone, realized that by sheer luck he had stumbled upon far the richest deposit he had ever seen or heard of, and realized, too, that these clever scoundrels had overreached themselves. There had been no need of salting. Had they but taken the trouble to search systematically, they must have found the spot. Had they but walked a few 100 yards from the spot they had salted last, this Tom Tiddler's ground had awaited them. Incredibly and incalculably rich it was, for Dick, in the hour or so that he permitted himself the luxury of picking them up, well nigh filled his pockets with the glittering little gems, and yet he had scarcely moved a yard from where he had picked up the first. The power of the blazing sun, now beating down upon him from high in the heavens, first admonished him of the fact that it was getting late, and that he must get back to camp, or probably someone would be coming to look for him, and that would never do, said Dick to himself. No one must know of this but the professor. So, reluctantly leaving his newly found bonanza, he tied up the double handful of diamonds in his old red handkerchief, thrust it in the bosom of his khaki shirt, and, securing the 2 errant mules, he struck across country to the camp. He found that during his absence a farther field had been successfully tested, and the meaning look the professor gave him when the latter rode into camp with the returning party and voiced his satisfaction at the morning's find left no doubt in Dick's mind but that the old man had profited by his advice, and would yet fool the would-be foolers. Itching as he was to impart the news of his splendid discovery to the professor, he had no opportunity of seeing him alone during the rest of the day, and he could only try to possess his soul with patience till night fell and the others were asleep. But that night the professor had a different plan in view. "Gentlemens," said the old man when supper was finished and they sat smoking by the fire, "now that the so successful expedition arrives at so near its conclusion, shall we not celebrate our good fortune? To-day is not our find of diamonds more rich than of ever? Let us drink then to our great good fortune, to the diamonds we have found, and to those we hope again to find tomorrow. Come." He led the way to his tent, and diving under his bed, he hauled out a case of wine. Strong, heady wine, Dick found it, and the warning glance the old man gave him as he filled his glass a second time made him sip but lightly of the potent liquor. Not so the two experts, all the prospectors, all the other members of the little coterie of scoundrels, who, safe in the assumption that they had hoodwinked the professor thoroughly, drank deep and made merry like men without a care. Bottle after bottle was opened, and soon one of the experts began to snore, and it was the professor himself who broke up the merry party by saying, "Gentlemens, tomorrow have we a long day and a long ride before us to test the other fields, and the Herr Prospector Jones, he must ride before us always, is it not? The test places to locate together with his comrade. And this so good man, see, he sleeps already. Let us then to rest. But first fill again your glasses and drink deep to the diamonds we have found, and to the discovery you will make tomorrow." Surely the wine was very potent, for Dick, thanks to the warning glances of the professor, had drank but little, yet he could scarcely keep awake, whilst Jones and Grossman were snoring like pigs, and could scarcely be awakened sufficiently to enable them to stagger to their tent. Dick barely managed to get to his own before sleep overcame him too, and his last hazy thought was, that wine was drugged. The professor must have got another plan. Once in the night he had a dim notion that someone was trying to waken him, that someone, was it the professor, was shaking him and whispering fiercely in his ear, "Wake, man, you must help me wake." But it all seemed like part of a dream, and he was too overpoweringly sleepy to be able to rouse, and the remembrance of this only came long after. But at last he did awake. His head was buzzing, and Andreas the Hottentot was shaking him. "Baas, baas, wake up," he was saying. "I cannot wake the others. Allemachtig, how they sleep like dead men." It was broad daylight, long past the hour when the prospectors should have ridden on ahead to locate the fields. Their horses, ready saddled, stood before their tent, and from it came the sound of stertorous snoring. Dick walked over and shook the men, and at last they stumbled shakily to their feet and made their way to the expert's tent, muttering something about instructions, but really, as Dick realized, to get the wherewithal to salt the remaining claims. Usually this proceeding was carried out long before daylight and with no one to watch. Now, however, the whole camp was astir. The old professor was washing in front of his tent, and the tiny modicum of water allowed him for the purpose. Boys were hurrying here and there, preparing breakfast, and Dick smiled grimly as he noticed that as Jones and Grossman entered the expert's tent, they carefully closed the fly behind them. He looked across at the professor, who had paused in his ablutions to look in the direction of the tent, and now stood, a comical enough looking object, his face covered in soapsuds, watching for the reappearance of the prospectors. Dick and he exchanged a glance of intelligence, and Dick took a step towards the old man, intending to whisper to him the news of what he had found the day before. But before he could do so, there came a shout from the tent, followed by a volley of oaths and ejaculations, the sound of a scuffle, and out into the open burst the two prospectors, locked together in a desperate struggle. "Hound, Schweinhund, robber!" gasped Grossman, as with his face purple with rage and exertion, he temporarily got the better of his long and wiry opponent, and bore him back. "Scoundrel that you are! You could not play straight even with me. Where are the diamonds, hound? Where have you hidden them?" "Yes, where are they? Own up, you thief!" chorused the two experts, who, pallid and debauched looking, now stood beside the two struggling men, and Dick now noticed that Gilderman held the small strong box, and that it was open and empty. The diamonds had gone. End of section 19. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 20 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 20. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, Prospector. Chapter 4, Part 1. The whole camp had now clustered round the fallen men, the professor grotesque in his thickly lathered face, Dick intensely interested and enjoying this fallout among thieves, the experts and financial men voluble and uneasy. And still Grossman knelt upon his slighter opponent, and still he gasped curses and questions, keeping so tight a grip upon June's throat that his eyes were starting from his head, and he could scarce breathe, much less answer. "Here, loosen him a bit," said Dick, grasping the big man by the shoulder. "Do you hear? You'll choke the man, and how the blazes can he answer you when you hold him like that? Now then, what's the matter?" "The diamonds are gone," said the glib Gilderman. "We each have a key on a chain round our necks. They were safe when we went to bed. The box was locked then, now it is open, and the stones are gone." "He has them, the hound," said Grossman. "We had arranged, Schweinhund," he yelled again. "It was to have been to-morrow night, and you have stolen them from me. Where have you buried them?" "Come off it," said Dick savagely, for Junes was again choking, and this time he twisted Grossman's arm till he freed the underman's throat. "Now then, Junes, what have you got to say?" "Liar and thief himself," gasped the half-choked Junes. "He has taken them while I slept. We had planned. Oh, let me up, damn you, and I'll tell them of your plan, you robbing, thieving swine that can't play straight even with your pal. Let me up, you German hog. Let me get a halt on you, and I'll show you. Let me up." "Let him up," said Dick, filled with keen enjoyment at seeing these two unprincipled scoundrels mauling each other, and only regretting the fact that the equally rascally onlookers did not take a hand. "Let him up, man, give him fair play, and let's hear all about it." And aided by the strong arm of the still soapy professor, he hauled the furious Grossman off his prey. And now comedy changed instantly to tragedy, for the panting Junes, springing to his feet, drew his revolver and fired point blank at his late assailant. Grossman spun half round, his mouth opened in a ghastly grin, and making 2 staggering steps, he fell to the ground, whilst Junes, profiting by the confusion, sprang to his horse and vaulted into the saddle. "Hands up!" he shouted, covering the group with his revolver. "I shoot the first man who moves. Grossman, you dog, where are the stones?" The dying man partly raised himself, and fixed an awful gaze upon his murderer. "Murderer and thief!" he gasped. "You have them yourself. I never woke till Sidney shook me." "Hell!" said Junes. "I believe you now. There's more roguery here than even I knew of. Hark you, Gilderman, and you other sharks, and keep your hands up. Professor, and you, Sidney, listen. These other men are thieves all. They've paid us to salt every patch they've tried so far. They brought over 1,000 carats of diamonds stolen from Coleman's Cook to do it with. I know who they bought them from, and Grossman and I thought they deserved to be robbed, and we intended doing so tonight. But one of these swine must have thought of the same game, and hid the stones somewhere. Own up, you cowardly blighters! Which of you has taken them? Where are they? Quick, keep your distance. Sidney, this ain't your trouble, and if you move again I'll put a bullet through you," he continued, for Dick was edging near with an idea of making a spring at the armed and desperate man. "And you, Professor, help Grossman. I'm sorry I shot you now, Heinrich. Now then, I want those diamonds quick, you Joburg sharps." The four scared men raised their voices in a chorus of protestations, in the middle of which Dick's eye caught sight of something over June's shoulder that caused him to start involuntarily. About half a mile away, a small cloud of dust was rising. Something or somebody was coming, and quickly too. Slight as had been Dick's movement, June's had noted it, and still covering the group, he swung his horse round till he could glance in the direction of the little cloud of dust, through which two horsemen could now be seen, and the glitter of the sun on their rifles showed them to be armed men, probably mounted police. A bitter curse broke from June's pale lips. "Police, by God!" he said. "They're too near, or I'd shoot all four of you whining swine. Hell! And I've killed Grossman for nothing." And furiously lashing his startled horse, he spurred madly away, striking savagely with his sjambok at the cowering quartet as he passed. "A rifle, a rifle!" gasped the wounded man, now plainly dying, and his ghastly face more awful by the look of terrible vindictiveness it now wore. "Shoot at the horse!" But before a rifle was forthcoming, the two mounted police rode into camp. They were bronze, burly men, arrayed in a corduroy uniform, with a wide felt hat bearing a large imperial crown in gilt as a badge, and were fully armed with Mauser rifles, revolver, and light saber. "Donnerwetter!" exclaimed the leader, a big sergeant or wachtmeester, as they cantered up. "What is this? Murder?" "Murder, and there goes the murderer," said the professor. "And is it you, Brunt?" he exclaimed as he looked into the sergeant's face. "Brunt is my name, it is true," said the wachtmeister gruffly, as he peered at the soap-lathered countenance before him. "But who are you? I can see naught but soap." "Himmel!" he shouted joyfully as the professor beamed back at him. "I was blind. It is my dear and honoured Herr Professor from Munich. Now, Gott sei Dank, I see you again after all these years." "It is indeed I, Brunt," said the professor. "But spur, man, spur, and bring back that man. We must talk later." With a sharp word to the trooper, Brunt unslung his rifle and spurred headlong after the fleeing horseman, now rapidly nearing the shelter of the dunes. Meanwhile, the professor and Dick turned their attention to the dying man, whilst the others resumed the clamour of questions and recriminations which the arrival of the police had interrupted. Gilderman, his self-confidence almost restored by the approaching death of one and the flight of the other of his accusers, now tried to brazen matters out. Thrusting himself before Dick, who was helping dress the wound, he bent down before Grossman and began loudly, so that all might hear. "Now then, Grossman, where are those diamonds? It is a most outrageous thing that you have done, to rob your employers in this manner, and that ridiculous lie of June's about salting. Come, man, tell me where the diamonds are, and tell these people that June's made up that yarn as you know he did, and I'll try to save you from the police. Come now, own up, where are the stones?" "You cannot save him from death and the Maker who will judge him," said the professor sternly, as he came from his tent with his medicine chest. "Man, think shame to pester the man so. Men do not lie on their deathbed." And as Gilderman did not move, he swung him aside by the collar, as though he had been a child. Gilderman uttered a furious exclamation. "Absurd, preposterous professor! Surely you are not mad enough to believe the story this would-be thief has told?" "Story?" queried the professor. "What story has he told?" "June's, yes. But this man, so far, has accused you of nothing." Gilderman flushed with vexation at the false step he had made. "But the diamonds," he insisted. "He confessed they had planned to steal them. Make him tell you where they are." "Maybe the police will bring them back with tunes," said the professor, going on with his work of dressing the wound. "And if not, you ask? Well, Herr Gilderman, what does it matter? 1,000 carats or so? The rich fields you found them on are still there. It took but a few hours to find the stones. Surely we can return to those so rich fields and find again 1,000 carats, hein?" Gilderman answered nothing, but if looks could have killed, the old professor, who did not even look at him, and Dick, who grinned maliciously full in his face, both of them would have preceded Grossman. Just then a faint shot sounded in the direction of the pursuit. It was followed by another and another, then a regular fusillade. "They are kneeling on the top of the first dune," called Gelder from a little rise a few yards away. "Now they are mounting again and coming back." "Then he's got away," said Dick. "His horse was fresh, and they looked as though they had ridden far." "Curse him! May he roast in hell!" whispered the dying man. But what he said was true. "Hush!" said the professor. "Do not try to talk now. Save your breath, man, and tell your story only to the police. And remember, I can do but little for you. Your time is very short." By this the police came cantering back into camp. "We hit him," said the Wachtmeister. "I saw him stagger in the saddle just as he got into the big dunes. His horse was fresh, and ours were fagged. It was useless to follow farther. If he is badly hit, we shall find him at the waterhole. If not, he will run right into the arms of the patrol we meet there. And now, what is all this about?" Gilderman took up the tale in voluble German, and it was now evident that, shaken by the protestations of the dying man and of his murderer, he was now suspicious of Gelder, who had held a key to the box in common with himself. He had been awakened by the outcry that the prospectors made when they saw the empty box lying by the side of the bed. His key, he remarked pointedly, was still fast round his neck. Perhaps, he added significantly, Gelder had left his lying about overnight. Gelder flushed angrily, and drawing his key out by the thin gold chain that secured it beneath his vest, shook it in Gilderman's face, when mutual recriminations began without undue loss of time. The old professor's wine had done its work well in more ways than one. Their colleagues, Zweiter and Spatboom, instantly took sides, and so they wrangled and vociferated, what time the big German Wachtmeister made voluminous notes in a big pocket-book. During all this the old professor said not a word, though there was a grim twinkle in his eye as he noted the spread of the quarrel. Aided by Dick, he had now finished attending to the dying man, whom they had taken into the professor's tent, and who lay gasping painfully, with the air whistling through the hole June's bullet had made in his lungs. He whispered something hoarsely and painfully to the professor. "Come, Herr Wachtmeister," the latter called to the big sergeant. "The man has but little time, and would make a statement." The sergeant came and knelt by the dying man. "Where are the diamonds?" he asked, pencil in hand. "Nein, ich wisse nicht," gasped Grossman. "Stoop lower, and I will tell all I know." "He lies," said Gilderman and Gelder together, crowding near to the bed. "Herr Wachtmeister, why listen to him? He lies." "Silence!" stormed the Wachtmeister fiercely. "Your time will come to speak. Stand back. And how know you if he lies before he speaks? Back!" And he forced them to do so, whilst in short, sobbing gasps, the dying man told of the whole knavery, how they had been bribed to do the actual salting, how each day Gilderman and Gelder had given them a certain number of stones to strew in likely places, and find ostentatiously in sight of the professor, how he and Jones had conceived the idea of stealing the diamonds and burying them where they could find them later, and how, when that morning they had overslept and entered the tent late and seen the strong box lying there empty, each had instantly suspected the other of stealing a march upon him. But dying he, Grossman, swore he knew nothing of the stones, nor did he now believe that Jones did. Those thieves, those men who first put temptation in our way, they know, ask them, curse them, he concluded, whilst the sergeant peremptorily demanded silence from the accused men, who were storming angrily at the dying man's denunciation. "Britman," he called to his comrade, "search all the tents, everything. I arrest you all. Let no man move till a search has been made. Now," he continued, rising from the dying man's side and turning on them, "which of you has the diamonds?" "Why should we steal them? Why believe the tale of this thief who owns he meant to steal them? Why believe him against us?" they demanded, united again now in their efforts to discredit Grossman. "One at a time," said the Wachtmeister angrily, "and silence, you others!" And he proceeded to catechize and badger them, one by one, filling page after page of his notebook with their replies. End of section 20. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 21 of a Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa, by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 21. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, Prospector. Chapter 4, Part 2. Meanwhile, Britman searched tent after tent, ransacking bags, portmanteau, and boxes, shaking out clothing and blankets, and prying into every conceivable article, in a vain endeavour to find the stones, whilst the indignant quartet under examination broke out again and again in a storm of impotent wrath. In the middle of this hubbub the Professor's voice was heard for the first time. "Hush!" he commanded sternly. "In the name of common humanity, hush, at least for a minute. The man is dying." Even as he spoke, Grossman, the death rattle in his throat, in a last convulsive effort, raised himself on his elbow, and with a terrible look on his face, pointed an accusing finger at Gilderman and the group round him, and with a last choking attempt at speech, fell back dead. Immediately Britman, who had finished his search in the other tents and stood looking on, addressed the Wachtmeister. "There is nothing there," he said, "and there remains but this, the Herr Professor's tent to search." The Wachtmeister turned apologetically to the Professor. "The Herr Professor will permit?" he asked. "And why this indignity, Brunt?" demanded the Professor sternly. "It is my duty, Herr Professor. In such cases I may not discriminate," apologized Brunt, "and it is but a matter of form." "So be it. Search." And the offended Professor turned again to the dead man, ignoring the industrious Britman, who emptied bags, unlocked boxes, peered into jars of chemicals, and generally upset the scientist's most sacred possessions. At length, in a dark corner of the tent, Britman came to a black box secured with a big padlock. "Herr Professor," he called, "this box, it is locked." The Professor simply grunted. "The key, Herr Professor?" he persisted. "I advise you to leave that box alone," growled the owner. "It must be opened, nicht wahr, Wachtmeister?" asked Britman of the sergeant. "Jawohl," said the Wachtmeister. "Again I advise you not," said the old man. "Surely there is no need. I do not wish it opened." By now everyone was looking at the Professor with wonder or suspicion. Even Dick could not understand his reluctance to have the box opened. "Sehr gut," said he, as all eyes were turned on him. "Take the key," and he flung it over to where Britman knelt by the box. The policeman fumbled with the lock, threw back the lid, and simultaneously gave vent to a terrific yell as he flung himself violently backwards. For from the open box rose the writhing forms of half a dozen big cobras, their hoods flattened and arched, vicious and ready to strike, whilst over one of the corners came gliding the broad flattened head and bloated body of a huge puff-adder. Within 5 seconds no one remained in the big tent but the dead man and the professor, who, laughing softly, proceeded to collect his straying pets, showing an utter disregard of any danger of being bitten, accountable for by the fact that he had removed every fang from the poisoned specimens long before. Dick had been as lively as anyone in making tracks, for he had a horror of snakes, and as he burst from the tent his foot caught in a guy rope, and down he went with the big Wachtmeister sprawling on top of him. Both scrambled up in quick time, for each of them imagined he had snakes crawling all over him. But as Dick rose to his feet, out from the bosom of his shirt fell the red handkerchief full of diamonds he had found the day before, and as it fell, out rolled a dozen or more of the little brilliants and lay there flashing and sparkling in the sunlight. "Donnerwetter!" yelled the Wachtmeister. "The diamonds! Here is the thief!" and instantly he seized Dick in a formidable grip. Curses and execrations burst from the other men, who, wildly excited, crowded round Dick and the diamonds, threatening and exulting. "Thief! Scoundrel! Rascally mule-driver! Schweinhund!" they cried. "The handcuffs, Britman, quick!" shouted the sergeant, and Dick realized instantly the seriousness of his position. He had had no opportunity of telling the professor of the find he had made, and who among these rogues, each eager to fix the guilt on someone else and discredit the tale both the dead man and Jones had told, would believe him if he told the story now? The quantity of diamonds he had found about equalled the stolen contents of the box, and things could scarcely look blacker for him. He knew the law was likely to be severe with him. As a Britisher, he would probably get the extreme sentence. There was no one but the professor to appeal to, and bitter thought, would even he believe him with all this damning evidence against him? All this passed through his mind in an instant as he stood in amazement, too taken aback to speak, impassively staring at the fallen diamonds. Then the Wachtmeister's grip tightened as Britman hurried up, making ready the handcuffs as he came. "I did not steal them," shouted Dick, finding his tongue at last. "I will explain. Professor, I did not steal them." "Lying rogue," said, or rather snarled Gilderman, thrusting his face close to Dick's, and filled with the rage of a lately frightened man. "Filthy donkey driver and thief, you were too miserable and contemptible for us even to suspect." And secure in the fact that the Wachtmeister held Dick, he struck the latter across the face with his open hand. Before he had time to draw back, things happened. Dick, blazing with fury at the indignity, wrenched himself free of the Wachtmeister, as though that big man had been a child, struck Gilderman a terrific smash on the nose that flattened it and him instantly, and seizing Gilder, who had tried to trip him, he threw that unfortunate Israelite on the top of his colleague. But now the other men flung themselves upon Dick simultaneously, and for a short but crowded period a most memorable scrap took place in and round that little prospecting camp. Dick, as he afterwards expressed it, was "all out" in that brief but brisk encounter, and fought with every limb and muscle he possessed. Borne down by sheer numbers for a moment, he succeeded in twisting Britman under him, and his knee, judiciously planted in the plump policeman's embon point as they fell, with the weight of the other crowd on top of them, drove all the wind out of that unfortunate man, who for a time took no further interest in the proceedings. Dick felt him gasp and subside, and at that very moment his hand came in contact with the heavy steel handcuffs. Here was a weapon worth having, and with such odds against him, Dick had no hesitation in using it, and swinging them round blindly at the arms clutching at him, he felt them meet flesh and bone with a soul-satisfying crunch. A sharp yelp followed, and Dick felt the scrum above him lighten. as Rita retired from the fray, spitting blood and curses in a polyglot and highly satisfactory manner. But now the big Wachtmeister, a powerful and athletic man, was less cumbered by his would-be helpers, and getting a firm grip on Dick with both arms, he gradually forced him down on the unfortunate Britman, whilst Spatboom, his one remaining helper, valiantly clung to Dick's frantically kicking legs. With a last desperate effort, the latter twisted himself sufficiently to allow his free arm to again swing the handcuffs, and this time they caught the Wachtmeister neatly on the nose, setting that organ bleeding profusely and raising the big Teuton's angry passions to a boiling over point. So far, to do him but justice, he had made no attempt to use his revolver, but now, roused by the blow and furious at the sight of his own blood, he immediately released Dick and drew his weapon. Dick heard the click of the hammer as he cocked it, heard, too, the furious "Schweinhund Engländer, I'll shoot you dead for that," saw the muzzle thrust within a few inches of his head, and shut his eyes. And as he did so, the Wachtmeister was hauled back by the shirt collar with terrific force, and flung back on the sand with his neck almost broken, whilst the bullet, meant for Dick's brains, sang over the neighbouring sand dune. A vigorous kick sent Dick's remaining assailant flying, and he scrambled to his feet to see the Professor calmly taking possession of the half-stunned Wachtmeister's pistol. "Enough!" he exclaimed. "Think shame, Brunt, to shoot an unarmed man. That would be cowardly, and you are no coward. They taught you not such unbillig Spiel at the gymnasium at Munich." "Unarmed!" spluttered the Wachtmeister. "He has the handcuffs, and my nose is smashed. Herr Professor, you must not stand between me and my prisoner. With all respect, no. Britman, you Schweinhund. Never have I seen such a Dummkopf. Secure him, I say." "Hold!" roared the Professor. "Touch him not till I hear what all this is about. Besides, the man will kill you. Never have I seen a better fighter or a better fight, and fair play he shall have. And explain? I saw not the beginning of all this. What has the Herr Sidney done?" "Done?" snarled Gilderman, sidling near, his face bruised and discoloured from Dick's first uppercut. "Done? Why, don't you see the thieving hound has stolen the diamonds? There they lay. They fell from his shirt, the dirty thief." Apparently, for the first time, the Professor's glance fell upon the red handkerchief with the diamonds, and he picked them up and stood balancing them in his hand, and looking from Dick to Gilderman before he replied. "Professor," began Dick, finding his tongue again, "I am no thief that you can bear witness I—" The Professor interrupted him with a gesture. "So," said he slowly, "and it was for this you attacked an unarmed and innocent man?" "Innocent!" spluttered Gelder. "This is too thick. There lie the stones. Who took them if he didn't?" "I did," said the Professor. End of section 21. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 22 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari. 7 Tales of Southwest Africa by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, prospector. Chapter 5, Part 1. There was silence for a few seconds, except for a universal gasp of wonder, which, as far as Dick was concerned, was mingled with relief and admiration. For here was this wonderful old Professor, who had already been a surprise packet to Dick in several ways, weighing in with a most finished and artistic lie, just in the nick of time to save him when everything appeared lost. "You!" cried Gilderman, as the Professor stood, still holding Brunt's revolver, and smiling blandly at the group of mauled and discomfited scoundrels. "You?" "Yes," he thundered, his jaw setting sternly again. I who you thought to dupe. I who have seen through your perfidious plan from the first." Oh, thought Dick, that's for the benefit of the police. I who you would have made the scapegoat for your villainy at the cost of my name and honour. I took the stones. Come, Herr Wachtmeister, take your revolver and listen. There is no need for further concealment. I drugged these men last night, and took the stones, foreseeing clearly that these scoundrels would quarrel when the loss was discovered, and they realized that they could salt no more, nor take back the lying proof they relied upon for their scheme. And it fell out as I had believed, though I did not foresee that murder would be done before I could prevent it. And I gave them to the Herr Sidney to guard for me, for he was the only honest man among this crowd of scoundrels, and I am an old and feeble man. The big Wachtmeister rubbed his throttled throat feelingly, and grunted dissent, whilst the accused and desperate quartet broke into angry protestations. "Deny it as you like," said the Professor. "Grossman swore it with his dying breath. June swore it after he had shot him. Sidney saw the salting with his own eyes." "The word of a murderer, a delirious man, and a thief against that of 4 gentlemen," Gilderman exclaimed, bluffing desperately for the benefit of the Wachtmeister and Bretman, who had pulled themselves together and stood looking, with lowering brows, from one to the other. "Gentlemen, lieber Gott! Then, gentlemen, if you still persist in your innocence, it is but of the simplest thing for you to prove it. The Herr Wachtmeister will take us all back to Luderitzbucht, and on the way, what is simpler than to again test the rich spots from which you obtained so easily these 1,000 carats, hein? If you found these there, there will be others. Nicht wahr? And then I will say that I am sorry. And meanwhile the Wachtmeister can keep the stones, and I will answer for this last theft, I, whose name is worth more than 1,000 such gentlemen as these. And now, Herr Wachtmeister, or rather shall I say, my dear pupil of the old Münchener days, I regret that I have hurt your throat, but I am sure you would rather that than be guilty of shooting an innocent and unarmed man who, I am sure, was first assaulted by these gentlemen." "Jawohl," grumbled the Wachtmeister. "That is true. That coward there struck him after I had seized his arms. Aber Donnerwetter, Herr Professor, why not have told me this there in the tent long ago? It would have saved me a broken nose from this innocent unarmed Englander of yours, and an almost broken neck from yourself. Tausend! I remember that grip of yours in the gymnasium of old, lieber Gott, but the years have not weakened it, and with this devil incarnate of an Englander to aid you, what had you to fear from 6 such as these? Why did you not bundle the whole lot back and have them locked up?" "They were all armed, and we were not," said the Professor. "Then we will disarm them," said Brunt, and covering them with his revolver, he made Bretman do so, taking away the revolver that each man carried, and taking not the slightest notice of their protests. "And now you are under arrest," he told them, "and at any attempt to escape you will be shot." Then, blowing a whistle, he summoned the camp boys, who, in mortal fear of the police, had obeyed their first order to remain with the horses some distance away, and who would have seen the white men kill each other till none were left, before daring to disobey that order, and told them harshly to bury Grossman, and prepare to strike camp and trek immediately. Dick, who had stood as one in a dream, and let the Professor do all the talking, now shook himself together sufficiently to hand over the handcuffs to Bretman, who only glared at him and apologized to Brunt for the unlucky blow he had given him. "I bear no malice, friend Englander," said the Wachtmeister, "but you have broken my nose, and some day I should like to meet you in friendly Ringenspiel. I think I would pay you in full for that blow." "Nothing would suit me better," said Dick eagerly, for he regretted the blow almost, but not quite, as much as the Wachtmeister, and he was a past master at wrestling. "Whenever you like, Herr Brunt. Shall we try a fall now?" "Himmel, no!" said the big fellow. "I have had plenty for one day if you have not. We must postpone the pleasure." Dick set about the business of striking camp, and for a time was fully occupied. Meanwhile his mind was in a whirl. That the professor had invented a plausible lie on the spur of the instant to save him was, of course, obvious, but it was apparently not all lie, for he had certainly drugged the wine the previous evening. But the stones, who had got them? He could have sworn that Jones had told the truth as he rode away, murderer though he was. And Grossman, would a dying man lie? He was itching to get near the professor alone, to tell him his own story. Possibly the old man believed him to be the thief, although he had lied to save him. Altogether, the whole thing was a puzzle. Meanwhile he went on with his work. Tents were struck, packs made up, and pack animals laden, and soon all that remained of the camp was the trestle, on which, covered with a sheet, lay the still form of Grossman. The Wachtmeister sang out a brief order. Two of the Hottentots rapidly shovelled out a shallow grave in the sand, barely covering the murdered man. Dick stood by with his hat off. He had barely escaped a bullet himself but an hour before. Poor beggar, he thought, shot and buried like a dog, and all because these bigger scoundrels tempted him to run crooked. And he was some woman's son. Someone will mourn him, buried like a dog. But it was not so, for looking up, he saw the professor, bareheaded, standing beside the grave, prayer book in hand, and he stood silent and respectful, while the old man read a short solemn prayer for the dead in his native German. Then mounting their horses, they trotted after the already moving cavalcade, leaving the forlorn little mound and the dead ashes of the campfire alone, marking where their camp had stood. The police officers rode ahead, the four conspirators, silent and dejected, a short distance behind them, and Dick and the professor brought up the rear. Gradually they fell farther behind, till well out of earshot of the others, and Dick at last had the chance to tell the story of how he found the stones. "Professor," he began, in low, eager tones, "I cannot thank you enough for inventing that story to save me, but you must not think I am a thief. These are not the stones from the box. I did not steal them." "I know that," interrupted the professor, "but where got you these?" "This side the big dune, where I first saw Grossman salting 2 days ago. They lie there in thousands. I got these in an hour or so." "Now, Gott sei Dank," said the professor joyfully. "These rascals then have too clever been, and the ground is in truth rich. Gott sei Dank. Our trip has not been in vain, but neither the police nor these knaves must know, and we must ride on quick, for I bade them test the ground again where they salted, and that is the first place, and they must find nothing." "We are nearly there," said Dick, "and it's risky, for where they salted is barely 300 yards from where the stones lie thick, but we must take them to where they picked their own up, and they won't search far. They are too down at mouth for that. But, Professor, where are the real stones? Who stole them? Who has them?" "Ach, that is the mystery," replied the professor, and spurred his horse on before Dick could ask him any more. An hour later they came to the big dune, the scene of Grossman's salting, and here Dick, with mixed feelings, stood by whilst Gilderman made his last attempt at bluff, setting the boys to work with sieves, whilst he and his colleagues searched all around the vicinity of that last rich find, and of course finding nothing, whilst had he known it, but a bare stone's throw or two away, they were lying in abundance. Dick could almost have found it in his heart to pity him, as the despairing, cadaverous wretch at length gave up the hopeless search. Late that evening, as they approached the first waterhole, the Wachtmeister pointed significantly to a saddled horse cropping quietly near by, whilst as they got nearer the pits, 5 or 6 big vultures flapped lazily away. "I knew I hit him," said the Wachtmeister significantly. "Junes," thought Dick. "Now if they find he really has the stones, what will happen then?" Junes it was. They found all that the vultures had left of him lying there by the water, with a ghastly bullet hole through back and shoulder. The marvel was that he had lived to ride so far, but there were no diamonds, and Dick was more mystified than ever. A few penciled words, scrawled on the leaf of a pocket-book, again telling the tale of the salting and naming Gilderman as the chief conspirator, lay pinned to the dead man's shirt, and the Wachtmeister, as he read it, called out grimly to them to come and look at another piece of their work. Reluctantly they came closer to the awful thing that had once been June's, whilst the police sergeant, long since inured to such sights all too frequent in the desert, read aloud the note, and asked them if they still denied the testimony of the two dead men. Gilderman in vain endeavoured to brazen it out, and the Wachtmeister, changing his tactics, forced him and the others to look close at what had been a face and identify it as that of June's. The terrible plan succeeded, for at the gruesome sight the little bravado left in them gave way entirely. Gilderman, physically sick, staggered away a yard or two and fell in a faint, and Gelder, whimpering like a child, broke down utterly. "Gott in Himmel!" he cried. "What a death! I can't stand any more of this. Yes, it is true, we were all in it, but the plan was Gilderman's." Again the Wachtmeister made notes, and in their efforts to stand in as well as possible, each now tried to further implicate the other, till the sergeant closed his book and roughly bade them be silent, and keep their precious tale for the Richter in Windhoek, who would try them. As they rode into Luderitzbucht a week later, one of the first men that Dick saw was Solly, who, in the excitement of the past few weeks, he had almost forgotten the existence of. But as he saw the little Jew, who had stood by him before, and who had been instrumental in getting him his job, he remembered that Solly would expect a full account of all that had happened, and the question was, should he tell him of the stones he had found, or only of the salting? However, he had neither time nor opportunity to say anything then, for encountering the little cavalcade just as the Wachtmeister led it up to the police station, he opened his little twinkling eyes wide at the sight of the 4 dejected and most obvious prisoners, gave Dick a wink which expressed volumes, and made off in a bee-line towards the telegraph station. There he sent a most innocent wire to a small retail tobacconist in Kimberley, a wire that apparently conveyed nothing more than a complaint as to the quality of certain cigars that Solly had received. Strangely enough, however, within an hour or two of its receipt, certain gentlemen, vitally connected with diamonds and all concerned in them, knew that they had no reason to fear the great north-eastern diamond fields, as they had been salted. Meanwhile, the Wachtmeister handed over Gilderman and Co. to the officer in charge at the police station, where they were detained in common with the diamonds, Dick's diamonds. To the Herr Professor the officials were politeness itself, and thanks to his good offices, even Dick was treated with civility, Englishman though he was. As they left the station they met the company's Luderitzbucht agent, a most important gentleman, who was looking both flushed and perturbed. It was evident that news travelled quickly in Luderitzbucht, for he had already, as his first words clearly proved, heard of the arrests. "Herr Professor," he blurted out, "what a calamity! Most unfortunate! Gilderman and the others all arrested. Surely most tactless. Could it not have been avoided? It might have been explained, but to arrest them all! The company is as good as floated." "Not all," said the Professor grimly, looking the excited agent up and down. "Not all, Herr Hauptmann. 2 are dead. We caught them salting, Herr Sidney here and myself. Surely it was tactless of them, a calamity, truly, yes, for them. And, Herr Hauptmann, if the new company has been floated without waiting for my report, so much the worse for them." The agent glared from the Professor to Dick, as though he would have liked to eat both of them, but he saw he had made a mistake, also saw that the 1,000 shares Gilderman had promised him would never materialize, and changed his tactics. "My dear Herr Professor," he said, "of course you were right." I was so upset for a moment that I did not quite know how to look at it, but of course you are right, and the ground then is worthless. Is it not so?" "I would not go so far as to say that," said the Professor, cautiously. "There has been no real test. These rascals started their salting at once. I leave immediately for Johannesburg tonight. I hear there is a steamer leaving then and there. I shall report thoroughly on what has happened. Possibly the company will send up a more carefully chosen expedition again. They have the option for another 3 months. In that case, and if they wish me to return, the Herr Sidney here will take charge of the prospecting." The agent looked sourly at Dick. "You know, Professor, the company like to engage their own prospectors," he demurred. "Yes, and I believe last time you recommended one of them," replied the Professor blandly. "Last time the company made a colossal mistake. Prospectors, experts, representatives, all were rogues. 2 lie dead back there in the dunes, and 4 lie in jail. I want no more of that kind. And, Herr Hauptmann, if I go, this man goes. If there is a man in the country who can find diamonds there, it is he." "That's a fact," said Dick to himself, as he realized all the Professor was doing for him. "And now, Herr Hauptmann," continued the old man, as they reached the agent's office, "pay Sidney his cheque and double it. I will answer to the company." So Dick got his cheque and his discharge, and making a straight line for the bank, he changed the former without loss of time. He had seen cheques stopped before, and trusted Hauptmann just about as much as he had trusted the Gilderman outfit. Then he went to the hotel where the Professor's belongings had been dumped, in the biggest room the building boasted. Here the scientist called him in, and locking the door, sat down on the bed and looked at him. "Young and strong and honest, you should become rich in this country, where honest men are so scarce," he said kindly. "Herr Sidney, or rather do I call you Dick, for you are young enough to be my son? You heard what I told the agent? Well, I go to Johannesburg in a few hours, but I shall come back, I am sure, though whether the company sends me straight back, or whether they await the expiration of the syndicate's lease, I cannot say. Financiers do strange things, and who knows what they will do? But when I come, you go too, and there will be an opportunity for you, such as few men have. You will know for certain beforehand where the stones lie rich. You can purchase shares as soon as flotation is effected. Knowing well they will become valuable, you can make your fortune." "But I have no money," said Dick. "My cheque won't last long." "You see that box?" asked the Professor, pointing to a certain black padlocked trunk amongst his baggage. "I haven't forgotten it," said Dick, feelingly. "Well, the wherewithal to pave your way to fortune lies in that." "Snakes!" exclaimed Dick, with a lively recollection of the last time that box had been opened. The Professor moved towards it. Dick moved towards the door. "Wait, man, wait," said the Professor. "But they are harmless." "Oh, yes, I know," said Dick, edging still nearer the door. "Pretty little things, some people call them, like that scorpion you raved about before. Here, I say, Professor, play the game. I don't want fortunes of that kind here. I'm off." "The door is locked," said the old man calmly. "Wunderbar! Here is a man I thought feared nothing, a fighter of the best, afraid of a few harmless snakes." "Professor," pleaded Dick, as the old man bent over the padlock, "don't do it. I don't want any fortune. Oh, Lord, I shall have 2 fits. Yow! Help! There he goes!" And as the box opened, Dick sprang on to the bed. "Quite harmless," said the Professor, as he flung back the lid. "And but how splendid! Wunderschön, hein?" 3 new specimens, among them of the varieties quite unknown, and the fame will be mine, and the scorpion you discovered, and so generously gave me. Ach, mein friend, now I can indeed repay you for your so great generosity. See then," and with a dramatic gesture he plunged his hand down among the wriggling snakes, and groping among them in a manner that made every hair on Dick's head stand up, till he felt like a porcupine, he drew forth a small bundle and tossed it on the bed. "Open it," he ordered. "No, Dummkopf, There are no snakes in it. Open!" Dick's fingers trembled as he undid the knots. He knew by the feel what to expect. End of section 22. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa. Section 23 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa, by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Salting of the Great Northeastern Fields, being an episode in the life of Dick Sidney, prospector. Chapter 5, Part 2. Yes, there they were, the 1,000 carats of diamonds that had caused 2 violent deaths, and a heap of trouble already, a double handful of beautiful little sparkling gems, the very facsimile of those others that Dick had found, and that now lay locked up and confiscated at the police station. "They are yours," said the professor. "Whose, if not Gilderman's or those other scoundrels in jail? The company's. It has no rights on the fields yet. The government's. It has those others you found in place of these, and to attempt to explain now would bring complications, and maybe, who knows, place us both in jail." Dick was tempted, but demurred. "You see, Professor," he said reluctantly, "these are not my stones. It isn't as if they were the stones I really found." "The police will scarcely give you those, I repeat," answered the other. "Lieber Gott, man, say what you mean. I stole them. Is that it? Of course I did, as I had a perfect right to bring about what I did, the confession of these knaves. And, but that Brunt annoyed me with his insistence to search my tent, I should have told him then. As it was, I let that fool Britman search, knowing that he would be frightened when he opened the box. Ach, you brave men! And then Dick has Sidney, if you wish. Well, Dick, then, what would have happened to you if they had found the diamonds you had? Just was I in time to make up the tale I did, when I saw you writing on the ground with the Wachtmeister's pistol at your head. So, if you will, I stole them. Will you not take them from me? They had yours in place of them. Take them. They are yours. And the one big director of the company in Johannesburg, to whom I shall the truth tell, he will applaud what I have done." The professor's arguments were far from flawless, but Dick yielded, for it had seemed more than hard to see the diamonds he had himself found handed over to the police, and after all it did not seem right to let 1,000 carats of diamonds go begging for an owner. And whatever qualms he had vanished at the delight of the old professor, as he made up the parcel again and stowed it carefully away in his pocket. An hour later the professor went on board, and Dick beat up a few friends, most of whom were dead broke, and proceeded to the Europatia Hof, the leading hotel, where he ordered such a feast as made the manager promptly ask for payment in advance. Satisfied on that point, he proceeded to surpass himself in so far as the limited capabilities of Luderitzbucht were concerned, and that night Dick and 4 other hungry men made up for lost time. The food was good, and the champagne that washed it down excellent, and Dick, as he bade the other men good night and turned away from the hotel towards his old diggings, felt at peace with all mankind. He had still 20 pounds in his pocket. He had the professor's promise of leading another trip to the northeast, and above all he had 1,000 carats of diamonds tied tightly in a bundle made fast inside his shirt. Fortune was smiling again. and full of happy dreams for the future, he sauntered down the pitch-dark street towards his room, whistling and without a care. And as he reached the door, something struck him with a dull, heavy thud at the back of the head, and he fell like a log on his own doorstep. When he came to himself, it was still dark, and for a moment he could scarce remember what had happened. Then it all came back to him in a flash. He had been sandbagged. His money was gone to the last penny, and so were the diamonds. Faint and sick, he dragged himself into his room and bathed his aching head. And now he saw, too, that all his belongings had been ransacked. They waited for me here, he thought, and he groaned in bitterness of spirit as he realized that as far as the diamonds were concerned it was useless to try and obtain redress legally. He had had no right to their possession. The professor had gone. There was no one he could turn to. Yes, there was Solly, and as soon as it was light he went and found him, of course, still in bed. "Ah," he said, "I heard you was having a thick night, and you look like it. Blued your cheque, I suppose?" "Not all," said Dick, "but it's gone," and he told him everything. "Blazes!" exclaimed the little man, leaping from his bed and beginning to dress in mad haste. "You fathead, you've done a fine thing. Why, you let me believe the fields were salted." "They were," said Dick, "but the real stones were there all the same." "But, you loony, I should have known this at once. Why, I went straight and wide to the people who must know these things, the people who make or break all diamond ventures, my people." "The Johannesburg company that sent the professor?" asked Dick, in his innocence. "Johannesburg the professor, I don't think," said Solly with the greatest scorn. "No, the people that control diamonds are a little firm of tobacconists in Kimberley." End of section 23. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa.